You know, we often think of our cognitive performance as something totally abstract, right? Like it's just a matter of having enough willpower or discipline or just waking up in a good mood. But modern neuroscience is revealing a radically different reality. Your focus, your memory, and your long-term cognitive integrity are physically built and broken down by the microscopic choices you're making every single hour of the day. Welcome to our deep dive explainer on the daily architecture of brain health. We're going to zoom all the way in, from the molecular level straight up to the mind, to see how our everyday, seemingly mundane habits literally shape the physical structure of our brains.
Here is how we're going to map out the journey of a single day. We'll start with the brain's delicate ecosystem, move into how hydration impacts cognitive integrity, and then tackle the infamous sugar cognitive crash. After that, we'll look at coffee, caffeine, and aging, and finally, wrap up with sleep and brain waste clearance.
All right, let's dive right into part 1, the brain's delicate ecosystem.
Okay, so to truly optimize our mental output, we first have to understand the actual physical environment inside our heads. Your brain isn't some solid computer hard drive. It's a highly specialized, fluid-dependent organ. We're talking about 75 to 80% water by mass. Now, I want you to imagine your typical crazy busy workday. You rush out the door, you skip your morning water, you sit down at your desk, and suddenly, it's late afternoon. So here's a really crucial question. What physically happens to the microscopic landscape of your brain when you just forget to drink water for 16 hours? And we're not talking about being stranded in the desert here. We are talking about a standard, modern lifestyle oversight.
The answer comes down to this tiny yet absolutely devastating number, 0.67%. Magnetic resonance imaging actually shows that a mere 16-hour fluid deprivation causes just a 0.67% increase in serum osmolality. Basically, your blood becomes ever so slightly more concentrated. But here's the kicker. That tiny 0.67% shift acts as a massive osmotic force. It literally pulls water out of your brain cells and into the surrounding space. Your brain tissue actively shrinks. The thickness of your cortex actually decreases. You are physically losing brain volume simply because you didn't drink enough water.
So that brings us to section 2, hydration and cognitive integrity.
That physical shrinkage we just talked about, it directly dictates your mental agility for the rest of your day. This is exactly why the very first step in our daily architecture has to be immediate morning rehydration. When we wake up, we are already in a mild fluid deficit, and how we respond to that deficit totally determines our capacity for deep work. Just think about this progression. At merely a 1 to 1.5% drop in body mass from water loss, your serum osmolality elevates. And what suffers? Your sustained attention and processing speed. This is that classic scenario where you just can't stay focused on a spreadsheet at 10 a.m. If you drop to a 2% loss, we start seeing whole brain shrinkage and compromised working memory. By the time you hit a 3 to 5% loss, your cerebral blood flow significantly declines. Stress hormones like cortisol spike, and complex planning goes completely out the window.
And the clinical evidence backing this up is just profound. Higher urine osmolality, which is a direct measurable marker of dehydration, has a statistically significant correlation with poorer cognitive performance and much slower reaction times. The subjects in these clinical studies don't just feel tired. Their neurons are literally firing slower. The brain's entire signaling network is fundamentally disrupted just by a lack of fluid balance.
To really understand why this happens, we have to talk about something called neurovascular coupling. This is this beautifully vital relationship where your active neurons signal your blood vessels to dilate, which rushes oxygen and glucose to the exact spot in your brain where you're thinking the hardest. Now, when you're dehydrated, your body releases a hormone called vasopressin to conserve water. Vasopressin then upregulates a really potent vasoconstrictor called endothelin-1, and this literally constricts the microvessels in your brain, choking off the blood supply and oxygen that your prefrontal cortex desperately needs to pull off complex, deep work.
So how do we actually defend our neurovascular coupling in the real world? Well, we need a practical framework. First, initiate immediate morning rehydration before you do anything else. Second, practice preemptive fluid spacing throughout the day. Don't wait until you're thirsty, because by then, that osmotic pull shrinking your brain has already started. Finally, accurately measure your hydration status using validated clinical tools. If you're catching a sample in a clear cup, use the Wardenar 7-color chart. But if you're assessing directly in the toilet bowl where the water dilutes things, you need to use the validated Wardenar 3-color lavatory chart, and you actually need to time the duration of your urine stream in seconds to get an accurate read. Accuracy really matters when you're protecting your cognitive integrity.
Moving on to section 3, the sugar cognitive crash.
As we push into the afternoon of our daily routine, we hit this massive modern lifestyle contradiction. We feel a dip in energy, so what do? We seek a quick fix, ultra-processed sugars. But we are falling into a deceptive biological trap here. On one hand, sure, you get a short-term dopamine boost. Glucose floods the brain, it temporarily lights up the prefrontal cortex, and you get an energy surge. It feels like productivity. But on the other side of the equation, the scientific literature is overwhelmingly clear about the long-term cognitive decline linked to constant blood sugar spikes. We're talking about impaired neural connectivity, small vessel disease that restricts blood flow, and yes, actual physical brain matter atrophy. High chronic sugar intake is strongly correlated with a significantly increased risk of vascular dementia and Alzheimer's disease.
And the most immediate issue is what happens roughly an hour after that sugar hit. You experience a rapid drop in blood glucose, the infamous sugar crash. This sudden steep deficit strips your prefrontal cortex of its primary fuel. Your brain basically panics, interpreting this crash as a literal survival threat. It triggers the release of the stress hormone cortisol, which induces irritability, anxiety, and severe mental fatigue. So you haven't just lost your focus, you have chemically induced a stress response that completely shatters your ability to do any deep, meaningful work for the rest of the day.
Which brings us to Section 4, coffee, caffeine, and aging.
Let's see how this all builds into another core pillar of our daily routine. A lot of times we reach for coffee alongside or instead of that afternoon sugar, viewing it purely as this utilitarian stimulant to keep us awake. But we really need to separate the caffeine from the coffee itself. Yes, caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors, which prevents the neurochemical signal of fatigue from registering in your brain, and that absolutely boosts short-term alertness and attention. But coffee, as a whole plant extract, is an absolute powerhouse of polyphenols and compounds like chlorogenic acid and pyroglutamate. These specific compounds are actively working to reduce neuroinflammation, modulate your excitatory synapses, and provide vital, lifelong cognitive preservation.
In fact, there are landmark scientific studies using Alzheimer's transgenic mice that found habitual caffeinated coffee consumption is incredibly neuroprotective. Researchers noted that caffeine can protect against, and amazingly, even reverse memory loss in Alzheimer's pathology. It actually lowers the blood plasma levels of toxic amyloid beta proteins. So habitual high-quality coffee consumption isn't just some quick productivity hack, it's a foundational strategy for healthy, resilient, cellular aging.
Finally, Section 5, sleep and brain waste clearance. As our day wraps up, we transition from the active demands of deep work to the absolutely vital, life-extending maintenance of the night. Sleep is not just you powering down. It's an incredibly active, dynamic state of physiological detoxification. Over the last decade or so, the discovery of a new biological system practically rewrote medical textbooks. See, unlike the rest of the body, the central nervous system doesn't have traditional lymphatic vessels to clear out waste. Instead, it relies on the glymphatic system. This is a highly specialized network that functions as the brain's waste clearance mechanism. Think of it as a microscopic dishwasher for your neural tissue. Now, what's really fascinating here is how this tiny cinematic journey plays out while you're dreaming. First, as the deep sleep state initiates, your brain cells literally shrink slightly, which opens up the spaces between them. Second, cerebrospinal fluid is pumped into the brain along the spaces surrounding your arteries, pulsing right along with the rhythm of your heartbeat. Third, these highly specialized channels on your brain's support cells, called astrocytic aquaporin 4 channels, facilitate the rapid exchange of this fluid deep into the brain tissue. And finally, this rushing fluid washes away the day's toxic metabolic byproducts. Specifically, it flushes out amyloid beta and tau proteins, the exact primary culprits behind neurodegenerative diseases, washing them right out into the peripheral lymphatic system. And timing is literally everything with this process. While the glymphatic system does function continuously in the background, its efficiency completely skyrockets during deep sleep. The clearance of harmful metabolites like amyloid beta literally doubles when you are asleep compared to when you're awake. This beautifully illustrates exactly why chronic sleep debt fundamentally accelerates cellular aging. If you consistently cut your sleep short, you are prematurely turning off the dishwasher, leaving neurotoxic proteins to accumulate and slowly suffocate your brain networks over time.
So, when we zoom out, we can see how beautifully and maybe a little terrifyingly interconnected our health systems are. Micromental health starts the second you wake up with hydration, which protects the neurovascular coupling you need for deep work. That deep work requires stable energy, free from the inflammatory, anxiety-inducing spikes of ultra-processed sugars. High-quality neurostimulants like coffee can protect your aging brain, but ultimately all of these daily systems rely on the nightly restorative wash of the glymphatic system during high-quality sleep. Every single choice weaves together to determine your long-term cognitive integrity.
Which leaves us with one really important, provocative thought to ponder. If the choices you make every day, from the exact amount of water you drink to the sleep you prioritize, are physically altering the microscopic architecture of your brain right this very second, what changes will you make tomorrow morning? Knowledge is only power when it actually alters our behavior. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of our brain's extraordinary ecosystem. Keep learning, keep optimizing, and take care of your mind.